Every morning, your brain wakes up with you, but the quality of your thoughts doesn't automatically rise with the sun. If you don't direct your mind, it defaults to survival, fear, distraction, doubt. That's why it's critical to take a few moments each day to reset, rewire, and reframe your inner narrative. You don't need more motivation. You need a better internal script. So here are 9 things to tell yourself every single day. Not for some esoteric feel-good reason, but because these statements train your brain, shift your neurochemistry, and prime you for performance, focus, and resilience. Every thought you entertain and every word you repeat internally is more than just mental noise. It is a form of instruction, not just metaphorically, but neurologically. Your brain listens closely to the way you speak to yourself, and over time, those messages begin to form patterns. These patterns become preferences, habits, tendencies, and ultimately identity. What's repeated becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar is trusted by the brain as reality, regardless of whether it's helpful or. This is not just the stuff of self-help books. It is observable in research on how the brain encodes repeated stimuli. Repetition shapes neural pathways. That's the core of how habits form, not just in behavior, but in thought. If you consistently tell yourself that you're distracted, overwhelmed, or incapable, your brain begins to associate those words with your default state. The problem isn't just that you're describing how you feel. It's that you're teaching your nervous system what to expect. It learns the tone, the energy, and the content. And in doing so, it prepares your biology to match it. Your breathing changes, your heart rate adapts, hormones shift. Cognitive performance either sharpens or dulls based on the nature of that inner narrative. Most people don't realize how often they affirm negative ideas about themselves in subtle, automatic ways. Phrases like, "I can't focus," or "this always happens to me," or "I'm so belayed" aren't just complaints, they are reinforcement loops. They are the equivalent of training data. When you say something enough times, your nervous system begins to wire itself to make it more real. Now, this also works in the opposite direction. When you intentionally interrupt those patterns with deliberate, affirmative thought, the brain doesn't immediately resist. It pays attention. If you say to yourself, "I can direct my attention," or "this moment is training for my focus," you're sending a new signal. Even if part of you doesn't fully believe it yet, you are still creating a different experience in your body. The prefrontal cortex, the region involved in planning and attention, becomes more active when you take charge of your thoughts. You begin to shift from a reactive state to a proactive one. You're no longer living in the default mode. You are training your focus, and your body responds accordingly. Neurons are not just processing information, they are responding to intention. Every time you speak internally with clarity and direction, you are increasing the salience of those words. This means the brain is more likely to tag that information as relevant. Over time, this can change what you notice in the world, how you interpret challenges, and how you recover from stress. This is not magical thinking. It's structured, it's measurable, and it's supported by imaging studies that show changes in brain activity based on mental rehearsal and internal language. Athletes use it. Surgeons use it. People recovering from trauma use it. But the mistake is thinking it's only for extreme performance or healing. In truth, everyone benefits from conscious self-talk because the brain is always adapting to what it's exposed to, whether you do it deliberately or not. This is why telling yourself certain phrases daily isn't just motivational, it's instructional. You are giving your brain a framework to follow. You're defining the type of input it should prioritize. And once that becomes consistent, output change. You start to feel more in control, not because your external life is easier, but because your internal guidance system has been calibrated with precision. And perhaps the most empowering part of all of this is that it doesn't require external validation. You don't need perfect conditions to apply this. You just need the discipline to direct your own mental voice each day. That voice becomes the architect of your attention. And attention, in turn, becomes the foundation for everything else: learning, decision-making, emotional regulation, and performance under pressure. When you begin your day by telling yourself what you want your mind to focus on, you are no longer waiting for clarity to arrive. You are generating it. You are shaping your internal landscape in a way that can withstand the noise, distraction, and uncertainty of the outside world. The power isn't in the words themselves, but in the effect they have on the brain over time. When you train your attention with deliberate internal dialogue, you're not just thinking, you're building. And what you build, you become. Most people go through life assuming that every thought they have is a reflection of reality. They treat the voice in their head as an accurate narrator of the truth. But in reality, the thoughts that pass through your mind are not always facts, and they certainly aren't always helpful. They're more like signals, fragments generated by memory, emotion, environment, and biology. They're shaped by past experiences, biases, current mood, and even blood sugar levels or sleep quality. So to assume that every thought is something you must believe or act on is to give away your power to something that was never designed to be in control. The brain produces thoughts in the same way the heart pumps blood or the stomach digests food. It's automatic. The difference is that we don't identify with our heartbeats, but we identify with our thoughts. And that's the truth. When you begin to observe your thoughts rather than obey them, everything shifts. You create space. That space is small at first, barely noticeable, but it's enough to pause before reacting. In that pause lives choice. You can decide whether a thought is useful or not. You can decide whether to follow it or to let it pass. This is not a denial of reality. It's a clarification of your role. You are not the thoughts themselves. You are the one noticing them. That distinction may seem subtle, but it is profoundly liberating, because once you realize you are the observer, you are no longer a hostage to every opinion, fear, or impulse that surfaces in your mind. Thoughts will come, some pleasant, some disturbing. But if you practice seeing them as mental events rather than directives, you weaken their grip on your emotional state. For example, a thought like I'm failing can feel overwhelming if you believe it out. But if you catch yourself and recognize, this is a thought I'm having, you immediately regain perspective. That recognition, this is a thought, not a fact, reduces emotional reactivity. Studies in neuroscience show that labeling emotions or thoughts with neutral language, like I'm noticing a thought about failure, activates regions of the brain associated with regulation and control, especially in the prefrontal cortex. It also quiets down the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This isn't just philosophical distancing, it's biological recalibration. The practice of separating yourself from your thoughts isn't about suppression or pretending they don't exist. It's about observing without merge. It's the mental equivalent of standing on the side of the road and watching cars go by. You see each one, maybe even recognize a few, but you don't feel compelled to jump in and ride with them. Some are loud, some are fast, some carry strong emotions. But you remain on the sidewalk grounded. That's the role of the observer. It doesn't require you to be indifferent or passive. In fact, it's one of the most active forms of mental training you can do, because it requires you to consistently interrupt automatic identification with your internal dialogue. This awareness doesn't make your problems disappear, but it changes how you meet them. Instead of reacting reflexively, you start to respond deliberately. Instead of spiraling into worry, you can say, this is a worry thought, and choose not to feed it. This ability isn't natural to everyone, but it is trainable. Like strengthening a muscle, you get better at it with repetition. Each time you recognize that you are the observer and not the thought, you strengthen neural pathways related to self-awareness and regulation. Over time, that becomes your new default. You become less volatile, more centered, and more capable of handling stress without being overwhelmed by it. There's a quiet kind of confidence that comes from knowing you can observe a storm without getting caught in it. And it changes your relationship, not just with your mind, but with life itself. When you stop treating every thought as truth, you also stop fearing them. You begin to see them for what they are: temporary, fluid, and often irrelevant. Some thoughts will still carry weight, but now you're choosing which ones to engage with, not being dragged around by them. This doesn't mean you lose emotion or become detached from reality. It means you become more connected to what's actually happening, instead of being lost in projections and assumptions generated by a mind trying to protect you through worry and prediction. The goal is not to silence your mind. The goal is to stop mistaking its noise for your identity. You will always have thoughts, but the more you practice witnessing rather than reacting, the more clarity you gain. You stop drowning in your mental environment and start navigating it with skill. And that skill is what allows you to stay calm in chaos, focused under pressure, and grounded in truth, your truth, not the automatic chatter of a brain doing what it was designed to do. When you realize you are the one observing your thoughts, you reclaim your ability to lead yourself, moment by moment, with awareness instead of autopilot. There's something fundamentally powerful that happens when you repeatedly tell yourself that you can handle discomfort. It may not feel true in the moment, but saying it, even quietly, internally, starts to build a relationship with challenge that is entirely different from what most people experience. Most of us are wired to avoid hard things. This is partly biological. The brain's default operating system is designed to keep you alive, not optimized. It favors energy conservation, comfort, familiarity. When it detects uncertainty, physical stress, or emotional friction, it sends signals that say, "Get out." But here's the important truth. Those signals are not stop signs. They are invitations. They are thresholds. And when you learn to stay present with those signals rather than retreating, you change something fundamental about your biology and your belief system at the same time. Every time you voluntarily face something difficult, whether it's a tough conversation, a workout, a new skill, or a moment of emotional struggle, you send a message to your nervous system that you are capable. And that message matters because confidence isn't built by thinking positively. It's built by demonstrating to yourself that you can show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Your brain remembers what you do. If you avoid challenge, your nervous system logs avoidance as the preferred strategy. It gets easier to back away next time. But if you step into difficulty, even in a small way, your brain encodes that too. And it builds a new model, a model that says discomfort isn't danger, that effort is survivable, that stress can be endured. There are actual measurable changes that happen when you adopt this posture toward difficulty. Areas of the brain responsible for fear and threat detection begin to regulate more efficiently. You begin to experience stress not as something to be eliminated, but as something to be organized and moved through. In short, you become more resilient. Resilience is not about pretending things don't hurt. It's not about ignoring fear. It's about building enough familiarity with hard experiences that they no longer have the same grip on you. And that process starts with a sentence as simple as, "I can do hard things." Not as a performance, not as a motivational chant, but as a reminder, a calibration point. Odds, something to bring your attention back to the fact that you are not helpless, even when it feels like you are. There's a fascinating aspect to how the brain responds to perceived effort. When you're under strain, physically or mentally, your system evaluates whether or not it's worth it to keep going. And what influences that evaluation isn't just the difficulty of the task, but the meaning you assign to it. If you tell yourself the challenge is proof of failure, you're more likely to quit. If you tell yourself the challenge is the path to adaptation, you're more likely to stay in it too. That's not just about attitude. It's chemistry. The brain's reward system is tightly linked to expectation. When effort is paired with a sense of purpose or forward movement, dopamine is released. This neurochemical doesn't just make you feel good. It literally helps you sustain action. It gives you energy to keep going. And that process is reinforced every time you mentally frame difficulty as part of growth, not as a sign of inadequacy. It's important to understand that the ability to persist doesn't require a lack of doubt. Most people think they have to feel confident before they act, but the sequence is actually reversed. You act first, you step into the hard thing, and through that action, confidence is built. It's earned, not inherited. Every rep under pressure, every quiet decision to continue, every moment you sit with discomfort rather than escape it, those become deposits. They accumulate, and eventually, they form the foundation of someone who knows deep down that they are capable of navigating adversity, not avoiding it. Navigating it, saying I can do hard things, is not about ego. It's not a denial of difficulty. It's a declaration of intention. You are letting your system know that you will not back down just because something is uncomfortable. And the more often you say it, especially in those moments when you least want to, the more weight it carries. Your words begin to shape your reality, not because they are magic, but because they change how you relate to pressure. You become someone who leans in, treats, ease. And that is the difference between a life that is reactive and one that is trained. There will always be hard things. Life doesn't get easier. but you can get strong. And the starting point for that strength is the belief, practiced daily, that you are not defined by ease, but by your willingness to engage with what is difficult. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, you still show up. And over time, showing up becomes who you are. Progress is not always loud. It doesn't always come with a breakthrough moment or a massive win. In fact, the most meaningful progress usually happens quietly, almost invisibly. It's the kind of change that builds under the surface, unnoticed by the world and sometimes even by yourself, until one day you realize you've crossed a line you used to think was impossible. That's what makes small wins so powerful. They accumulate, they compound. They change who you are one choice at a time. But the problem is that most people never notice them, and so they never give themselves credit. They dismiss the small decisions, the early wake-ups, the 5 minutes of stretching, the single healthy meal, the one time they didn't reach for their phone in a moment of boredom. But these small wins matter more than people think because they shape the structure of your day and eventually the direction of your life. When you repeat something even slightly positive or aligned with your goals, you are reinforcing a behavioral loop. It may not feel like much in the moment, but it's a signal to your brain that this is the kind of person you're becoming. And the brain responds to that. It learns from repetition, not intensity. Big moments are exciting, but they are rare. What you do consistently is what your brain remembers. So when you choose something small but intentional, you are essentially casting a vote for the future version of yourself. Over time, those votes add up. They become habits, and those habits become identity. There's also a neurological reason small wins matter so much. The brain's motivation and reward system doesn't just respond to achievement. It responds to progress. And it responds best when that progress is clear and immediate. That's why a checklist feels satisfying. That's why finishing a workout, even a short one, can boost your energy. It's not because the task itself is life-changing. It's because your brain interprets it as a movement forward. And movement forward, no matter how slight, activates the system that keeps you engaged. It releases dopamine, a chemical often misunderstood as just a pleasure molecule. In reality, dopamine is more about pursuit. It helps sustain effort. It tells your body and brain, this is working, keep going. The problem many people run into is that they set goals that are so distant or so abstract that they rarely feel the sense of completion needed to maintain momentum. They wait for the big moment, the transformation, the breakthrough, and while those can happen, they're almost always the result of hundreds of small wins that came before. If you wait until the big moment to feel successful, you'll miss the entire path that leads there. You'll burn out or lose interest or convince yourself you're not making progress. But when you start to train yourself to notice and appreciate the small steps, something changes. You build emotional endurance. You learn how to stay in the game long enough for the bigger results to take shape. You also begin to shift the way you measure success. It stops being about perfection and starts being about consistency. You recognize that the win isn't just finishing the race. It's showing up to train when you didn't feel like it. It's making the right decision when it wasn't convenient. And that changes your relationship with effort. It becomes less about pressure and more about process, less about impressing others and more about honoring your path. This mindset isn't just sustainable. It's powerful because it allows you to keep going even when no one's watching, even when progress feels slow. Small wins also teach you something about trust. Every time you follow through on a commitment, no matter how minor, you're proving to yourself that your word means something, that you are capable of self-direction, that you don't need dramatic results to stay committed. This builds internal credibility. And internal credibility is what carries you through the hard seasons, the ones where external validation is scarce and the rewards aren't immediate. When you've built a relationship with yourself based on small, consistent wins, you no longer need proof from the outside to keep going. You know who you are because of what you do. And the beautiful thing is that this can start at any time. You don't have to wait for a Monday or a new month or a clean slate. You can begin with a single action, a single intentional decision, and then another. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be deliberate. The goal isn't speed, it's direction. The people who create real change in their lives aren't the ones who sprint and crash. They're the ones who walk steadily, collecting small wins like bricks, and over time, build something unshakable. So pay attention to the little victories. Celebrate them. Stack them because they're not small. They're the foundation. The way you speak to yourself is not just a reflection of your inner state. It's also a signal to your body. Every word you use, every phrase you repeat, is received by your nervous system like a command. Most people assume their internal language is just private dialogue without consequence, but the truth is far more significant. Your internal voice is not silent to your biology. It echoes through every system in your body: your heart rate, your breathing, your posture, your hormonal response. The things you tell yourself in moments of stress or fatigue are not just thoughts. They are triggers. They influence what kind of neurochemicals are released, what kind of energy is mobilized, and how prepared or overwhelmed your body becomes. It's common to underestimate the influence of these inner messages because the changes they create are often subtle. Say to yourself, even half-consciously, "I can't handle this," and there's a chain reaction. Your breath may shorten, your shoulders may tense, your cortisol levels may rise. Say instead, "I'm handling it," even if you're unsure, and you may notice a softening in your jaw, a deeper breath, a slight release of tension. These responses don't depend on whether you fully believe the words. They respond to the pattern, the tone, and the intent. Your body is constantly listening even when you're not. This is especially true in high-pressure situations. If your internal dialogue becomes harsh, critical, or panicked, your system interprets that as a threat. It doesn't differentiate between an actual physical danger and the psychological danger you've just described to yourself. And so it reacts accordingly with hypervigilance, reduced cognitive flexibility, and a narrowed focus. These are survival responses. Useful if you're escaping real danger, but counterproductive when trying to make good decisions or perform under pressure. On the other hand, when your internal voice is calm, steady, and affirming, your physiology reflects that stability. Your body prepares not for escape, but for endurance. Not for panic, but for presence. One of the most misunderstood ideas about self-talk is that it's only about confidence. But in reality, it's also about regulation. The way you speak to yourself helps regulate your internal state. It gives structure to chaos. When emotions rise or situations feel uncertain, clear language becomes a tool. It becomes a form of direction. And the body responds to direction far more reliably than it responds to chaos. It doesn't need perfection. It needs clarity. Saying something as simple as "okay right now" can be enough to bring the system out of hyperarousal and into a state where choices are possible again. There's research supporting this idea. Studies that show how reframing a situation with different language changes the way the brain processes it. For instance, replacing the phrase "I'm nervous" with "I'm excited" activates different neural pathways. The physiological symptoms may be similar: elevated heart rate, alertness, but the interpretation changes everything. The brain uses language to predict what's coming. If you tell it something is threatening, it prepares for survival. If you tell it something is challenging but manageable, it prepares for engagement. That shift affects everything from blood pressure to reaction time to working memory. It's also important to realize that your internal voice becomes habitual. Whatever you repeat most often will become the default. If your normal pattern is criticism, your body becomes accustomed to functioning under low-level threat. You might not notice the toll it's taking until it shows up as chronic stress, fatigue, or a general sense of heaviness you can't explain. Conversely, if your internal language is grounded, constructive, and honest, not fake positivity, but real support, you build a different baseline. One where your system learns to stay balanced, even when things are difficult. You don't need to narrate your entire life. You don't have to chant affirmations all day, but the moments when it matters most are usually small and easy to miss. The moment before a difficult task, the moment right after a mistake, the moment when uncertainty hits. Those are the windows where your internal voice has the most power. And if you can catch yourself to, just for a few seconds, and choose a sentence that is steady, encouraging, or even just neutral, you're not just calming yourself down. You're shaping your baseline response for the future. What you say internally becomes a form of training. Over time, it becomes part of your identity. You are literally rehearsing the way your body and mind respond to pressure, to fatigue, to doubt. And when practiced regularly, this becomes your new pattern. Your physiology learns to stay centered because it trusts your voice. So speak as if your body is listening, because it is. Speak like you are your own guide, because you are, not just in thoughts, but in tone, in timing, and in truth. Every word you say inside builds the environment you live in, from the inside out.